Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are. Thanks for joining us at this webinar. My name is Arthur Lupia, but my friends call me Skip. And I am the Assistant Director of the National Science Foundation and the head of the Social, Behavioral, and Economics Directorate. What I want to talk to you about today, and we'll have some time for questions at the end, is about what's going on in the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate, including a new approach that we have. If you want to think two words about what we're doing, think growth strategy, but we'll get into that. So if you have questions, we'll be taking them at the end. And apparently, I can't see what you can see, but there's an email address on your screen, and that's where you send the questions. So thank you very much. Is it at the bottom? Excellent. All right. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about what we do, because I don't know what everyone knows about the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate, and then I'll get to the changes. SBE in a word, so SBE is what we call the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate. SBE is amazing. SBE affects quality of life for people around the world. It helps people reconcile their actions and their aspirations. It helps people in desperate situations get through the day. It is the basis of so many strategies for taking on big challenges like poverty and civil strife. And it's also the basis of so many business plans that have helped entrepreneurs around the country develop new technologies that change our life. The way that we fund the social, behavioral, and economic sciences at NSF is kind of distinct. We fund basic research, so we love applied research, but we fund fundamental research. And we fund it across the sciences. We hit all the sciences in our directorate, and we work across the sciences with all of the other directorates at NSF. It makes for a really amazing place to propose innovative ideas that change the world. And we have a pretty good track record at doing that. And part of what I'm about to tell you is not only what we've done, but to really invite you to be a part of it. So we have some main goals in the directorate. So one is to advance science, and we do that in so many ways. There's research that we fund across a range of disciplines, across a range of methodologies. We're working with an increasingly diverse scientific workforce, and we're trying to broaden and hasten the pipeline. So we're trying to advance science in a lot of different ways. A lot of the work we do grows the economy, and that matters in part because we are federally funded. Our organization has a single funder. It's the United States taxpayer. And so part of what we need to do is show that a lot of the work that we fund, or some of it at least, really leads to economic growth that provides more opportunities for everyone. Enhancing safety and security is also a big emphasis. In our age, there are a lot of opportunities and a lot of challenges. We need to get people like our servicemen and women and our first responders information they can use, because in desperate situations, every second counts. And this organization, this agency, has been really good at building the fundamental research that improves safety and security for people around the country. And then improving quality of life. To me, that's an overview. My background is a little bit quantitative, and so I can tell you that when I come to work every day, quality of life is the dependent variable that I care about most, and it motivates, I think, all of us at the agency. So what are the impacts that we have? And there are many. For most of us, the impact we're used to is in terms of education. Some of us educate K through 12, and some of us educate college students, and some of us educate graduate students. And there's so much from the social and behavioral sciences that not only we teach students, but a lot of our work actually improves the way that so many things are taught. And so that's a wonderful legacy to be a part of. I am grateful to anyone who enters this line of work. I think that a lot of the work we do in science is a form of service, and so whether you're in the classroom, whether you're advising, public organizations, anyone who does that, I mean, really should have our gratitude. But for for a lot of us, it starts with education. I mentioned security. There are a bunch of military in my family, so grew up understanding the role of service to the country. There are people who serve in so many different ways. And again, a lot of the research that we fund really helps to inform and give us the ability to achieve critical objectives in ways that help our servicemen and women be most effective. So there are so many domains in which the social and behavioral sciences have an impact. There's also medicine. We have a great agency in town called the National Institutes of Health that fund a lot of that work. But there are social and behavioral components to how we understand medicine, to how we understand the delivery of health services. And again, a lot of the basic research that we fund can actually be used to help people in the health domain serve others more effectively. There's also infrastructure. I have a picture here of physical infrastructure, but from physical infrastructure to cyber infrastructure, it's one thing to build something, it's another thing to know how it's going to work. And often the interaction between the machines or the buildings and the people really have the impact on quality of life. The social and behavioral sciences, in collaboration with other types of research, are really a key to understanding how we can build things that help people. Some of you who've been watching the news over the last year, you know that in big tech and in some AI, people have built very big architectures, maybe with good intentions, but maybe they didn't think about the human interaction until the very end of the workflow, and so then unintended consequences multiplied. By bringing the social and behavioral sciences earlier into conversations about how to build things, whether it's a website or a building or a bridge, we can have greater efficiency, greater service, and I think fewer unintended consequences. And education is, again, what we're all about. So NSF has been funding this type of research for a long time, and there are all kinds of ways to measure the success of it, but one that's popular in science entities are Nobel Prizes. NSF has a bit of a winning streak when it comes to Nobel Prizes in economics. SBE, our directorate, has funded 45 of the last 50 economics Nobel winners. And a critical thing to notice is that we funded all of them before they won their prize. A big thing at NSF, because we do fundamental research, is supporting early career researchers. When people are just kind of emerging from graduate school and they've seen the literature, but they see their own way they want to deal with it. They want to put things together in a way that no one ever has before. And I think in a lot of ways that's our sweet spot because we fund fundamental research. So I think it is not accidental that, you know, in economics where there is a Nobel Prize, so many of the people that ultimately, you know, make the grand changes got early support or mid-career support from this agency. So that's a little bit about what we do, and I want to talk for a second about how we do it, just because I think the structure isn't always transparent. There are four parts of our directorate. So one part of our directorate is called Behavioral and Cognitive Sciences, and we fund research in areas that have to do with brains and how people think. So this includes areas like cognitive neuroscience and social psychology, but also linguistics, there where we think about fundamental human conceptual frameworks, and so many more. So the behavioral and cognitive sciences are there. We have another division called Social and Economic Sciences, and that's where we fund things like economics and sociology and research by political scientists, and also some of our big data infrastructure, like the General Social Survey, the American National Election Studies, and the Panel Study of Income Dynamics. So that's a really important division for the agency. We also have an Office of Multidisciplinary Activities, and that's where we fund a lot of postdocs, research opportunities for undergraduates, and that's where we take kind of the totality of all the things that we fund in the directorate, and if they don't have a home in one of the two divisions that are listed first, we can often find a home for them here. And then we have another element of SBE that a lot of people may not know about, and it's called NCSES. So let me tell you a bit about that, because it's a little different. I call NCSES the crown jewel of the National Science Foundation, but it has a more official name. So NCSES is a federal statistical agency. It's the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, and it provides essential information for America's science and engineering enterprise. It is the main source of information about the science, who goes into science and what happens to them throughout their careers, through graduate school, what kind of jobs do they get, and so forth. In our efforts to understand how to improve graduate education, or how to broaden pipelines, or how to help the skilled technical workforce. These are people who work in STEM places, but they have associates associate's degrees. They go to community college, they learn amazing things, and they're a huge part of our workflow. Data about them and more are things that we collect at NCSES. One of the most famous things that NCSES does in association with the National Science Board is produce the Science and Engineering Indicators. So this is a congressionally mandated report that comes out every other year, and it tells Congress and the nation how we're doing over time, what types of educations people are getting, what types of fields they're going into, how we do in comparison to other countries. The Science and Engineering Indicators are awesome. And you should look up more information. You can just type it into Google and find information about them. The new one will be coming out, the 2020 digest will be coming out in January, but we've actually changed the way that we're distributing this, and now we reveal parts of these studies over time. So again, you can learn more about that online. This part of SBE, NCSES, also produces some other really valuable reports. One, if you haven't heard of it before, you might look at our Women, Minorities, and Persons with Disabilities in Science and Engineering report. And it's really the nation's biggest in-depth study about how people who traditionally have been left out of science and engineering workplaces, what's being done to bring them in, where we're succeeding and where we're failing. And this type of data is really important because if you want to be really efficient and effective in giving people all the opportunities to come in, and we have big challenges in science, so we really need everybody who wants to be part of this. This report helps us do something along the lines of precision medicine. It helps us be more precise about knowing where we have problems and where we can go. It runs a lot of other studies too, and if we had a lot of time, I would tell you about all of them. So that is an overview of how we do things. So now let's talk about the present and the future. So I think as we look at the social, behavioral, and economic sciences today, we see a couple things. First is worldwide impact, and it's undeniable. I don't know if you have a link here, but if you type my name and the letters NSB, National Science Board, you can see a presentation that our directorate made to the National Science Board in July. The National Science Board oversees the National Science Foundation. They're all presidentially appointed people from science and all over society, and we presented a lot of the impacts of the social and behavioral sciences. I think that members of that committee they seemed very impressed and actually even somewhat surprised at the range of impact that we're having. So we're having a worldwide impact, and it's really amazing. We're increasingly rigorous in terms of the range of methods and the types of data that we collect and analyze. The way that people are thinking about causality and reproducibility and things of that nature are getting more and more rigorous. And we're increasingly diverse, but both in the case of rigor and the case of diversity, but we know we have a long way to go, and so that's something we work on every day. We're also, I know there's a stereotype of ivory towers in academics, and we can say that stereotype is partially true. But we also know in the social and behavioral sciences there are so many of us, people who are at universities or people who are out in so many sectors of society that are taking the skills and the insights from the social and behavioral sciences and using them everywhere, such that now people who have this training and this knowledge are integrated and networked in all areas of science and society. So if we look at SBE today, you might say, well, this should be the golden age of social and behavioral science. And I think in a lot of ways it is. But for those of you who have watched the news over the last 10, 15 years or keep track of science funding, you know that the story of social science isn't always a pleasant one. There are often questions asked about the value of social science. So some people say, well, you guys, maybe you study things we already know because I'm a person and I know people and you guys study people, but maybe you can't tell me new things. There are other people who have other concerns, which is why we fund social science instead of other things. And so those are questions that we don't shy away from here. Based on the experiences I've had at NSF and the experiences we all had beforehand, we're very bullish on the portfolio. We think the impact on quality of life of this portfolio is so massive that it's worth taking every opportunity we can to make the strongest argument we can for this research and to present it in the most effective way. And so with these challenges and opportunities in mind, we've been putting together a strategy. So here's the outline of the strategy. So the strategic objectives are, one, to increase the public value of basic research in the social and behavioral sciences. At NSF, we have this opportunity to be a conduit between research communities and the American public who pays for NSF. Through naming programs and through presenting ourselves in a certain way, we can help researchers write broader impact statements that are commensurate with the challenges that our nation faces. At the same time, if we do that right, it gets easier for so many people to tell the story of why the social and behavioral sciences are critical, why they're important, and why they should be supported. So we're making a lot of efforts to increase the public value so that people can see this. We also have this amazing history, and so part of what we want to do going forward is to make the value of existing work more apparent to a wide range of stakeholders. People who are at universities every day to people who will never step foot on a university or who will never enter a government building. How can we help people understand that at the end of the day, what we're studying and what we're funding at this agency can help them in their lives? So those are the two prime objectives that we have. And in what's happening, I think it's important to understand that what we're talking about is a growth strategy. Growth in appreciation, growth in application, and if we are successful, growth in opportunities to fund this type of research. So what is the strategy? The strategy has three components. Okay? So one is communications, and the idea there is we want to go on offense. Some of you who've been paying attention to the way the social and behavioral sciences are talked about in Washington, you might see that a lot of times we have to play defense. The question is, why aren't you doing this, or why do you do that? And a lot of times we're forced to respond. We think that the portfolio is so strong that if we are purposeful in telling the stories in ways that resonate with people, in ways that hit them where they are, they'll be able to tell the stories on their own, tell the stories to one another. And when we do that, we're able to go on offense. Instead of constantly sort of having to defend what we're doing, we can have people better articulate why this type of work must be done and supported. Second is repositioning the portfolio, and I know that's probably why most of you are here, because we had a Dear Colleague letter talking about what our plans are for doing that. And the idea of repositioning the portfolio is to make the public value of the research that we fund more apparent. We love the research that we fund. But when you look at a program name, again, I mentioned it's kind of a bridge. One, it signals to researchers the types of opportunities we have, but it also signals to members of Congress and taxpayers and citizens across the country, what the value is. And if we have programs at NSF whose value is hard to explain, that makes everything harder. That makes the communication harder and the stakeholders supporting us harder. So we have found ways to, we've been talking with stakeholders for well over a year, I'll show you the details in a second, to figure out how to do that more effectively. Just for those who are not familiar with NSF, this is not a new thing at NSF. NSF has continually done this sort of thing throughout its history, so much so that today we have probably about 500 funding programs across the whole agency. Very few are named after academic disciplines, because if you're at a university, you might think you know what an academic discipline is, but again, a lot of people haven't been at universities or just are not thinking, and the value is harder to explain. So what the foundation has done over time is taken the great things that people do and named programs after them. So if you go look at any of the other directorates now, or even ours, most of the programs are named not after a discipline that you'd see on a university like department list. They're named after what scholars do and why it matters, or why it matters. And so the repositioning is to help us play catch up a little bit in that respect, but also make the value more apparent. The third part of our strategy is partnerships. And the idea there is we fund amazing basic research that can help people. There are so many other organizations across the country, whether they're philanthropies, other agencies, maybe even companies or nonprofits, who know how to bring ideas to people, whether they're brought to market or just brought to communities. So we can't fund that type of thing, but if we fund our part and somebody else does that part, we've got an opportunity to create these amazing ecosystems where our work helps people more quickly and at scale. So we'll talk about partnerships, but the idea is to increase the impact of what we're doing. So I'll show you one thing about our comms strategy, and it's based around this idea. So this is a simple sentence, or a simple set of words. Your life, our work, SBE. What does that mean? So I think there are three ways to tell a science story. One is to tell a story just about the science. And that would be that would be like what every journal article ever has done. We have a motivation, we have maybe a lit review, we talk about maybe prior research, we lay out our design, we do our analysis, we do an interpretation, we talk about the data. And that's great. That's a really important way to convey science. But for some people who aren't really into science, they don't read journal articles. And so another thing we do is instead of telling a story about science, we tell a story about scientists. So we say, here's Jane, and Jane's a scientist, and we tell the story of Jane, and Jane's awesome, and she did a discovery. And for some people, like, that's really, like, I might not understand science that well or care about it, but I care about people like Jane, and it's so cool to know that she's doing this science, and that helps people get at it. But there's a third way to operate, and the third way is to say, what I care about is you. So you learn about an audience, you learn about their challenges, you learn about their, what they wish for, and then you tell their story. And you validate them. Like, you don't tell a story at them. You learn enough about their lives and their experiences that you validate what they go through or what they're trying to achieve. And then if in part of their story it turns out that the work that we do would help them, then that's when we talk about ourselves. We do it from their perspective. We keep the focus on their journey. And we get out, our part gets out as soon as possible. The story is always about them. But we've found that when you tell stories this way, they're a little more memorable. I mean, think about the books or the movies that you've liked over your life. I mean, when there's a character in the movie or a character in the book that you can relate to, and the book is talking about how they take the next step on their journey, you experience that with them. And so, I've never lived on Tatooine, but Luke Skywalker did. And there's when I see that story, even though I will never have those experiences, you root for Luke Skywalker because you see an aspirational version of yourself there. You pick Hamlet, pick whatever, Three Little Pigs, whatever it is you want. In science, we don't tell enough of those stories. A lot of times, and I say this with love to every scientist, sometimes we talk at people rather than with or to them. And so part of what we want to do at SBE is tell stories in this third way as well. So hence, some of these narratives are about your life. Our work is your life, and SBE is how we do it. If you want to see some examples of how we're starting to work this out, there's a website, there's a web address listed at the bottom. These are things that everybody can do, but they're critical for making the case for social and behavioral sciences. The other thing to remember is that when we post things online about this, we're competing with everybody. We're competing with Beyonce and Pokemon and cat videos and things of that nature. And so to reach people who haven't been thinking about the value of the social and behavioral sciences, you need to sometimes produce content that is about them and deeply meaningful to them. And this is, this is our commitment in telling this third type of story to try to be relevant. And again, we're not doing this to ask for anything. We're doing this to make people aware of how we can benefit them. And I think that could have a longer term effect of people realizing and telling each other stories of why they need us. So now to the repositioning. So this is something we've been working on for actually over a year. The first public presentation we made to a set of 35 executive directors of academic professional associations was on September 26, 2018, so just over a year ago. And here's the basic idea. So I would have given a talk that's kind of like the one we just did, which is talking about the amazing value that we have, but also the challenges that we face in trying to articulate the value. So starting in September and going through May, what we would do is go out in front of groups of people, all different types of groups, and give the story, and then start to present ideas of how we might reposition, rename programs, move things around, combine, split, things of that nature, to validate the research that we're funding, but do it in ways that's consistent with the rest of the agency, but also that makes the value more apparent. So we got lots of feedback, and sometimes people do this, and sometimes they look really interested, and you take account of all of that. So we did that for a long time, listening to people inside the building, people outside the building. Actually, for people inside the building, on Halloween last year, we opened up an email address called newsbe.gov, and gave everybody an opportunity to send us both comments about what they thought we could do, but also things they were hearing. So that was a really great way to learn things. So over this period of time, what I want to tell you now, if you were in those presentations, I'm going to tell you what was a little bit of what was going on that might not have been apparent. we actually laid out over 250 ideas of ways we could change things. So what we would do is we'd give a general talk and we'd say, we're thinking about this and we're thinking about that, and we'd describe what we were doing, and then audiences would say, well, have you thought about this? Would you change it that way? We don't really like this, or we really love that. And so I don't actually know the numbers. At some point when we have spare time, which at NSF is never, but at some point I'll actually count them, but it's well over 250. We actually just chose 9 changes to make because when we talk to our stakeholders, people in Congress and OMB and the rest of the government, when we talk to people that we serve, potential partners that we work with, these were 9 ideas that really resonated as improvements over what we have now. But happy to talk about things of that nature. So I will say we wanted to talk to people the whole time, but we had 2 mandated cones of silence. So there was a federal government shutdown from the end of December to just like almost the end of January. And during that time, we weren't even allowed to talk to our own employees, so we couldn't talk to you. So that was one period where we weren't allowed to work. Also, NSF is a union facility. And when we make a change like this, we have to work with the union to make sure that they're okay with any of the structural implications of the changes we made. So from mid-February till the last week of March, we were working with the union on just making sure that this was okay with the collective bargaining agreement. And during that time, we weren't allowed to talk either. So we had these 2 periods where we weren't allowed to talk to anybody. The rest of the time, we were out on the road and trying to learn things. So in April, so from September to March, we had a basic idea, but we didn't have anything really written down. Like I had titles written down and maybe 1 or 2 sentences of things we were thinking of doing. But really in April, we started having more concrete conversations about what we'd do. And really, I think in July and August is when it kicked into gear. We actually, the things that you saw in the Dear Colleague letter, I think were really mostly written, after we had these conversations for a long time, I think like late July, early August. I'm looking for, do you think that's probably, yeah. So that's around when we did that. And then we have a clearance process. So when we have an idea like this, we have all kinds of levels of management at NSF that we clear it through. We talk to our funding committees. We talk to our oversight committees. And we'd been talking to folks like that throughout the year, getting their feedback, but laying out, here are our intentions and here's what we're looking at doing. And those are continuous conversations, of course, but that's the calendar. So now I want to talk about the actual changes that we're introducing. And I'll say one thing, because I understand people, these changes I think are exciting. They will help us articulate the value of, if you do research that NSF can fund, and that's really fundamental research again. We don't fund advocacy, so if we love you if you're advocates, we love you if you do applied research. We're just not allowed to fund you. But if you if you do fundamental research, we're allowed to do that. And again, this will help. So here's the first thing to know. All of the changes that we are talking about will take place starting next year for deadlines and solicitations that have a deadline of next year. So for some of you, that means the solicitation that will come up probably are they up now or come up in a month? Or the one there, if you've been sending proposals to a program that traditionally have a January 15th deadline or something like that, this will affect your next funding cycle. If you are in a program that has your deadlines in March or April or next July, it'll be then. If you have a funding deadline in 2019, this doesn't affect it. Okay, so now I'll talk about the 9 changes. Okay, so we have had a program called RIDER. RIDER is an interesting program. It's an acronym for a much longer title. It's about research infrastructure for data for the social sciences. Like we can't actually fit all the words in it. And it's a really interesting program, but as you can see, I've been here a year and I find it hard to explain what it means, and many other people have too. So the idea here is how do you capture the notion that if we have a lot of data and we merge it with the best idea in the social and behavioral sciences, we could create a lot of new value. So if that's your objective, the idea is we're repositioning to this program. So the program will be called Human Networks and Data Science. Okay? So what we're doing now is here's the idea. If you study networks of anything related to the social and behavioral sciences, so they could be networks of neurons, they could be networks of individuals, they could be networks of communities, neighborhoods, languages, cultures, and you want to do it with data, and you want to collect data in innovative ways, and you want to analyze it rigorously, here's your space, here's the lane. So it's consistent with what Ryder was doing, but we're propping it up in a way that makes the value more apparent. And this is the type of thing I think when we talk with partners, potential partners inside, outside the building and government, this is a concept that people really get excited about. So whereas Ryder was hard to explain, this one's a little easier. On a similar notion, we had an amazing program here called CCE STEM. And I assume most of you haven't heard of it. So let me walk you through it. In the year that I've been in Washington, because I'm usually at the University of Michigan, the one thing I've really seen increase in emphasis here is ethics. With big data, with AI, the questions of, are people thinking about the ethics? Not at the end, but when you start the work. And it happens in SBE, we had a program that focused on ethics. So this one is called Cultivating Cultures of Ethics in STEM. So that's a great thing to do, but it's a little hard to understand what it is, right? So I have to explain it. What if instead we reoriented that program and name it Ethical and Responsible Research? So we will fund basic research on how to make research more ethical and responsible. So we can think about ethics. Certain people think about open science and replicability and reproducibility from an ethical and responsible framework. This would be your lane. So we're building on the great legacy of CCE STEM, but stating it in a way where we can grow it. But it also makes the value more apparent. In the last week, I think there were 3 different National Academies meetings on the subjects of open science and responsibility and so forth. So this is clearly an area where there's a lot of interest, but boy, do we need research. We need research on how, it's one thing to talk about being ethical, it's another to think about how to efficiently and effectively and powerfully put it into scientific ecosystems. This is a lane for that. Speaking of that, I'm going to go to another program. We have a program called Science of Science and Innovation Policy. This is a really good program, but the name confused people. Just in terms of pronunciation, is it Science of Science and Innovation Policy, or is it Science of Science and Innovation Policy? That, is one. The thing I was remarking about during my first year here is the program actually funds a lot of amazing things, and I would go and talk to people who I was sure knew about it, and they didn't know about it at all. And so, I thought there's a way to take the value of this program and make its value more apparent. Also, the word policy is in here, and we don't fund advocacy, but sometimes when the word policy is in a program, it draws that type of attention, and we don't want people to take a whole lot of time to write a proposal to us that we just can't fund because it's not in our lane. So, with admiration for the history of that program in mind, we're renaming that Science of Science, which is also what many members of that science refer to the enterprise as. But then we have, after the colon, 3 focuses: discovery, communication, and impact. So here's what we're looking for, and it builds on the SciSIP legacy. 1, discovery. Can you do basic research on scientific workflows? How to make them more efficient? How to make them more diverse and broaden participation? If you're interested in the cultural parts of open science, how do we change scientific cultures, in the discovery process to make replicability something that's more feasible, that's incentive compatible? So the first sub-lane of Science is about discovery. Can you do basic research that can help us discover faster, more effective, more efficiently? On communication, okay, what this is not about is getting attention. What this is about is, can we communicate scientific information in ways that lead people to have an accurate understanding of what's been said? Because accuracy is really what matters in science. So we're willing to fund basic research studies, on the science of science communication that focus on accurate interpretation. And then finally, impact. What impact are scientific studies of any kind having? We need rigorous measurements. We need real arguments about how to measure these things. And SciSIP funded some of that. We want to make really clear in this program that those are our emphases. So we're building on the legacy, but I think this helps us really operate that type of program with a lot more focus. We have a great program. We had a great program called Documenting Endangered Languages. And since most people on this, I'm going to guess, most people on the webinar are not linguists, here's my sad attempt at a 30-second description of what linguistics is. Most people in the world speak a few languages. And then there are tons of languages that few people speak. But in these tons of languages, many of which are indigenous, are amazing things you can learn because of all the variation, right? You can learn things not just about language, but about human conceptual frameworks and human interrelationships and communication and so forth. And traditionally, it's been tough for people in linguistics to study this type of thing because usually people were studying the traditional languages. So the documenting endangered languages idea was to create a lane for this type of study, and it's vitally important. So here's the problem we had at NSF. We're a basic science funding agency, and sometimes stakeholders would say, well, you guys are funding documenting, and that doesn't sound like science, and why are you doing that instead of something else? But when we look at the portfolio, it's like, no, there's a more accurate way to describe what we're doing, and it can be part of this endeavor. So again, we worked with worked with stakeholders a lot on this, and we're renaming NSF's part of this endeavor to be dynamic language infrastructure. This is actually the part of DEL that we have funded for a long time. So one thing I should say about the documenting endangered languages, we've run it as a partnership with the National Endowment of Humanities, and they're amazing. And so we actually have one call that we do together, we have review panels that we do together, and then we fund the science part and they fund the humanities part. So in this repositioning, all that's going to continue. Like all that's, if you've been applying to that program, that's all the same. The difference is trying to make clear to everyone that there's a science part of this, DLI, and there's a humanities part, DEL, but it works together. And if you are part of this community, I can not only tell you that, that we're continuing everything. As a result of doing this, we're able to continue the agreement with the National Endowment of Humanities for additional years. And for those of you who aren't in government, it's really hard to like continue things. And we got this. This was a bonus, which allows us to continue the relationship. This is, I think, a very positive move. I'm grateful to all the people in the Linguistic Society of America and the DEL community that helped us sort of get to this point. So I think this is a real, I hate to say dynamic, it's a new way to describe just how awesome this type of research is. We have a program called Law and Social Science. I'm not going to use the word awesome again. I got to find other words for other synonyms for outstanding. Law and social science. There are social scientific approaches to studying law, to studying how it is structured, how it interrelates with other parts of society and culture to affect what we do. It's an amazing set of scientific activities, and at NSF we've been really proud to fund it. So that's a great legacy. But law and social science was confusing to some people because the idea was, well, what if we're developing things in engineering or biology or chemistry, and and we want to know how the law interacts with that. Because if you're building a new technology and you don't understand the legal frameworks that you're entering into, you might build it and then find out you can't implement it. And then you had good intentions, but you've wasted all this time. So the following move is meant to build on the law and social science tradition, stay firmly focused on social scientific studies of law, but make sure that we can also help have this group of scholars study other types of relationships between law and science. So that's the basic idea. The same type of work done on a bigger stage, law and science. So we are interested in all the work we were funding before, but if someone wants to expand and say, I want to think about engineering, computer science, machine learning, AI, take any of the subfields you want, and think about it in a social scientific way, how to understand its implications, law and science is the place to go. Finally, my home discipline, political science. I love political science. I've been in the science communication game long enough to know that not everyone does. In places like Washington, people ask questions about it. Is it a real science? And you've heard, I don't need to repeat them here, you've heard many of the criticisms. NSF receives a lot of those criticisms, and for those of you who know anything about the history of this agency, there have been multiple attempts to close the program or reduce its size, and really a kind of a continual set of questions about why NSF funds it. So I'll tell you why NSF funds it, because I've looked at the portfolio. People do great work, unbelievable work that helps public and private institutions in this country better serve people. It is of critical importance to the nation. So that's the message we need to send, but is there a better way to send it? And so what we've looked at is the portfolio and looked at, again, how NSF names programs, and instead of focusing on a name that confuses people, could we talk about the value of this program? right? So if we look at the portfolio, there's two things that I think everybody we have funded in recent years can write to, two targets. So one of them is security and preparedness. If you're familiar with the program, you know a lot of the work that we do focuses on international relations, certain areas of comparative politics, comparative political economy, that really focus on how can we keep the nation more secure, how can we help first responders. Now, we do basic research, so we're not doing research on how to help a specific person in the military, but the fundamental theories and data collections that we are involved in are the launching pad for so many innovations and applications, right, in this domain. And no one else in the agency can do this. We can do it, right? And so you might say, well, I'm a political scientist and I don't really do security preparedness. Where do I fit in? And everyone else that we've funded fits in here, accountable institutions and behavior. And you might say, well, that's not what I call myself. And so let's think about this. Suppose you study groups or elections or legislatures or the bureaucracy. Why is NSF paying for these things? And I think ultimately the value bridge that connects the researchers to the stakeholders and the public has to be, we study this because we want you to live a better life. We want government and nonprofits to be more responsive to you. We want services to be provided more effectively and efficiently where that is possible. And we need fundamental research on all of these areas and more, right, to understand how that happens, and no one else in the agency is going to do that, right? So there's a bunch of us here. I think there are at least 7 people in the building who have political science PhDs, and we love the discipline. We're having a continuing dialogue with leaders of the discipline about how to do this. But these are sub-brands that I think help us tell the story much more effectively. And if researchers who study all the areas we've been funding for years, and we really welcome everybody, the real ask here is for 1 or 2 more sentences in your broader impact statement to say, I study X because down the line, if I'm right or if we discover this is how it can make someone's life better. And that's what this whole agency is about. But particularly for political science, again, I'm in political science, we've just been asked to answer a different set of questions right now, and we should answer them aggressively and forcefully because we actually have the portfolio to back it up. So this is how we're doing it. If you're a graduate student, we have a doctoral dissertation, what does the RIG stand for?
Doctoral dissertation,
research improvement grants. We're not changing anything for you right now because we want to give time to adapt. And we're actually talking with the community about just the best ways to do this because we really don't want to exclude people. This is, we've been working on this. We're open. We're listening to things. So, please let us know what you're thinking because this is, again, people aren't used to seeing change here. But these changes, again, I would just ask you, if you've never looked at the list of programs and other directorates, please look at it for a second, because these look a lot more like what people are happy to fund in lots of other directorates than what we've had. And I say that with, I wish I'd been dropped in the universe where I could just say political science and everyone says, yes, of course we should spend a lot of money on that. I wasn't. Maybe working together we'll get closer to that universe, but right now I'm not there. So this is the most forceful and aggressive way that I know how to make the case for this work, because it really is great. So there we are. There are the programs. DLI is dynamic language infrastructure, part of linguistics, and that's what you're seeing. So I want to talk about a couple future things that we're working on. We've had conversations about trying to bring all the social sciences together on an effort to strengthen American infrastructure. Again, as I mentioned before, you build bridges, you build big web utilities, you build large buildings, and if you don't think about the people from the beginning, what have you actually built? And over again, we're seeing that sometimes you build unintended consequences. So we're trying to minimize that, so that's what we're working on. Build and broaden. I am very concerned about broadening participation, and I am not only focused on groups, I'm focused on, many people from historically underrepresented groups are not at the universities that NSF typically funds. And so myself and others have been doing a lot of outreach trying to figure out how can we increase support at universities where historically underrepresented people are more numerous, and to really have a lasting impact. So build and broaden is an idea about how to create research opportunities at scale at universities where people who've been left out but who want to come in. And then I won't talk about this now, but for those of you interested in funding opportunities in social behavioral sciences, we also have this huge list of big ideas. Big ideas are agency-wide endeavors where we really need great social and behavioral science proposals. I can tell you that we lead the future of work big idea. We co-lead the rules of life big idea, and we're involved in the leadership of the rest that you see here. I'd be happy to take questions about them in the Q&A. You can read about them. But this is, again, if you were saying, oh boy, you know, NSF doesn't have enough funding opportunities for me, we are fighting for you. I mean, hopefully that's apparent in what I've been talking about for the last, I don't have the time, so whatever minutes it is. But the big ideas are a lane that's open for you. And our program officers, I am willing to answer questions about how to play in this big idea game. But it's very hard for the social and behavioral sciences to be represented in these contexts unless we get great proposals. So we got some good proposals in the first year, but we really need good proposals in the next year. So if you're on this webinar and you're innovative and you're interdisciplinary and you're looking for ways to be a part of basic research, please, in addition to our programs, think about the big ideas. So the last topic I want to talk about is partnerships. So we are funded by Congress, and you know they write the legislation, and the president signs it. There are other organizations that fund social science, and I think that we can all do much better by you, the research community, and by the people we try to serve, if we're better coordinated. So I have been, and others in the building have been engaged in conversations with many organizations about potential partnerships. And let me just explain what a partnership would look like. NSF has four main assets, right? We have tremendous brand equity, people like NSF. We get money from Congress to fund basic research, which means we can fund things that fail. And that's interesting because, you know, we don't necessarily like failure, but sometimes you can learn things from failure that you can't learn from success. There are so many organizations, philanthropies, agencies, and so forth. It's just hard to fail because your turnaround time, you need a return on investment in 6 months, 12 months, 24 months. We operate in a different, we can fund basic research. So that's a pretty amazing asset that we have that a lot of other people don't have. So we have brand equity, we fund basic research. We have a very good peer review system. We're always trying to improve it, but in comparison to, and I say this with love, in comparison to some private philanthropies, we all know the story if you're old, my age. Sometimes you get money from a philanthropy because there's a guy who knows a guy who knows a guy, and it's usually guys, and so somebody gets funding. And so, like, that's a fine way to do some things, but sometimes you want more rigorous peer review to bring a whole bunch of perspectives to the table to figure out, okay, what are the things that are going to give us the highest octane? So we have a pretty good peer review system that brings in lots of different people, and our review panels are getting much more diverse methodologically and with respect to historically underrepresented groups and women. So I think ours does pretty well. Finally, our fourth asset is we have well-informed networks in every research university in this country. We're just we know a lot of people because of our panelists, so here's the idea. There are organizations that want to serve the public who have different assets. Maybe they have connections to populations that we don't have. Maybe they have an applied emphasis that we can't have. Maybe they have, you know, access to funds that we don't have. So we take our assets, mix them with theirs, and we can create a new ecosystem where we fund the basic and, no offense, ugly parts. I like the ugly. I like the ugly fundamental research because that's how you learn stuff. And other people can fund the beautiful applications, and that's great. But if we're coordinating, doing joint calls, and so forth, we can take the great ideas that the research that we support generates and maybe bring it to people faster and at scale. So that's the exciting thing and so what I hope is that leads to new funding opportunities, maybe jointly with other agencies and so forth. And to try and accomplish that, we made a hire, which some of you have heard about, our friend Danny Goroff and our friends at the Sloan Foundation. So Danny Goroff has been a significant social scientist for a long time, was at Harvard for 20 years, taught amazing classes there, built a lot of intellectual infrastructure, had a number of other positions, and then for the last 10 years has been vice president at the Sloan Foundation, where they've done amazing things. Sloan has allowed Danny Goroff to come and work with us, to help us. He's going to be the new director of the Social and Behavioral Science Division, but he's also has a lot of experience with partnerships and a lot of experience working with the organizations who want to work with us. So this is, he's a rock star. I mean, just, you know, and when you can hire one, you do. And so we're very grateful to the Sloan Foundation for allowing this to happen. We're excited for Danny to get started. But this hopefully signals to you how serious we are about building new funding pathways to bring a rock star in and help us out. Ultimately, we are responsible to, at the end of the day, the case for SBE has to be made every year. Like today's the last day of the fiscal year. Our official budget is going to be zero at the end of today. We're told to spend everything. And then tomorrow we start a new year. Well, that's emblematic of the fact that every year we have to make the case. Every year we have to make the case for SBE. And we have to make it to the American public. We have to make it to the taxpayer. We have to make it so that the folks who get to make decisions about funding hear the great things about your work. And so this is just something to keep in mind as we go forward. So I don't know how much time I left. I think 10 minutes. Am I good? That's good. Okay, that's weird. So if you have questions now, we have wonderful NSF staff who you can't see on camera, and they're writing them down, and they're going to slide them over, and I'm going to get through as many as I can in 10 minutes. If I don't get to your question now, you can either send them to me actually, maybe they could use that email address. I don't know. I mean, it's right there. We repurposed it. The other thing is whatever email you got to tell you about this webinar, I'm doing 3 virtual office hours in the next 3 or 4 weeks. You can see when they are. And so the thing about the virtual office hours is that you can hear the questions that other people are asking, so that might be more efficient. We're also going to build an FAQ. So I apologize if I don't get to your questions, but now I'm going to read about it. Science of science. What about, so I'm just reading it loud, so I haven't seen these before. And I don't know who asked this, so I kind of wanted to do the David Letterman thing, where I'm like, thank you, Danny from Arkansas. So thank you, whoever sent this. Science of science. What about the science of engineering or math? There are many important questions in more applied domains. That's a fascinating question. We actually, when we were testing different concepts, we were trying to figure out, well, with respect to engineering, we just kind of think of it as all the same here. I mean, we work with engineers all the time. So we had tested like science of science and engineering, but we just thought, I'll just tell you the main impression I got. It seemed to draw more attention to the distinction. And ultimately what we're asking people to do is use scientific methods to kind of help improve all workflows. So, we love engineering. We work with engineering on future of work and things of that nature. Again, it wasn't meant to be exclusionary. In fact, when we had the other title, people thought it made the exclusion. And I'll just say on math, this may be, every subculture has their own language. We just think of math as part of science, and I hope that doesn't offend you. Because I understand math can be part of philosophy too, but I think just in the building, no one ever, so this is a good question. I hadn't heard this before because we talked to a bunch of different folks about it. That hadn't occurred to us, but our intention is to do scientific studies of the whole domain, including math and engineering. But thank you for asking this question, and I'm sorry I don't know who you are. Will the Doctoral Dissertation Improvement Grant Program for Political Science, so thank you, will remain under the old program, or will it be managed jointly by the new SAP and AIB programs? Okay, thank you. Should I answer that, or do you want? Okay, so for right now, if you're sending to that program, you're going to send it to a front end. Everybody that's involved in SAP and AIB and all the panelists are all political scientists, right? So from the submission process, you'll do the same thing that was done last year and the year before and the year before. And the types of reviewers you'll get will be the same as the ones you got the year before and the year before. So we're leaving open how to do that in the future. We understand that graduate students, I mean, it would be tough to make the adjustment now because we don't have a website where we can say, well, here's where we fund in SAP and here's where we fund in AIB. And if you're a graduate student, the first thing you do is look for examples of what's been funded. So right now, we're going to leave that program alone. So, it would be political science. So we'd be happy to hear feedback from you about whether and how to do this. But from the perspective of any applicant to the Doctoral Dissertation Improvement Grant Program, everything's going to be the same from your perspective. Am I getting that right? Okay, I have Brian Humes by the side here. He's awesome, and he'll join me on camera if we get to something that I really can't answer. Is that good? Mm-hmm. All right, excellent. He made fun of my mug too, just for the record. Where does geography fit in? So geography is an awesome program. We have a geography and spatial sciences program. So geography fits in, it's awesome. I'm using the word again, sorry. It's a great program. We get a lot of applications for it. We have great program officers, and it's one of our benchmarks in BCS. If you want to ask, here's the deeper question that I shouldn't answer, but you want to ask anyways, you might say, well, why is it in BCS as opposed to SCS? Because geography could be in the social sciences, could be in the behavioral sciences. I think there's a historical element to that, but in terms of the review panels that we assemble, it's people that are dedicated to geography generally declined, so our review panels have mixes of those folks. You might be asking because early on, we had some ideas about renaming that program. Actually, they came from the community, and we just didn't find one that was better at that point. So, and that was always the criteria, right? I mean, we didn't name these programs just because we had, just for the fun of it, because you might suggest, when you try and change programs, fun isn't the only experience you have. We did it when we thought we could really make a more powerful case for the research. We haven't, we loved geography and spatial sciences, and we don't have a better alternative yet. But if you have one, please send them in, because we're open. All right, this is a good one. It sounds like all of these programs are broader expanding. Is the budget also expanding? So I'm going to answer the question in two ways. That's the idea, right? That is the strategy. But I'll just tell you what you can read in the newspaper now. Effective tomorrow, we'll be on a continuing resolution, right? So what that means is we're going to have the same budget for the foreseeable future that we had last year. So there's no changes coming right now. And there are probably people on the webinar who know more about politics than I do. I can't speculate far, as a government official, I can't say anything beyond the continuing resolution. I will tell you this. The strategy that we have, if you want to know the answer to this question, watch the video that we gave to the NSB. Again, you can type my name into it, Skip Lupia NSB. Watch the reaction of the National Science Board. Watch people say that they just have a new appreciation for what we're doing. That is a 20-minute version of our strategy. And if we do this right, and if you help us do this by sending great proposals to the new programs, when it comes time to increase budgets, we're going to have a much stronger claim than we've had at any time in the recent past. And that's the idea. But the answer to your question now is nobody's budget is changing for the foreseeable future because we're under a continuing resolution, as are all government agencies at this point. Are all government agencies under the CR? Is defense accepted? I don't know. So
separate.
Yeah.
Our budget resolution was passed.
Okay. I know we're under a CR, so we're flat until we hear otherwise. All right. How do I figure out which SBE program is the best home for my proposal? That is a great question. And so here's something I'm going to, thank you for coming. Here's something I'm going to say that I'm going to say I didn't really know it before I came here, but I know it now. We have amazing program officers. We have program officers that bust their butts every day. I've been at universities for, 30-something years, and I love people I've worked with. I've never seen a harder group of working people than our program officers. They are available to answer questions. So if you're not sure, you can, if you're afraid to approach a program officer, write to me, right? My email is on the internet. You can type my name. And I'll send you a program up. But the program officers will tell you, they're like, well, here's what we're looking for, and here's, this might be a better fit somewhere else. Like, you shouldn't be afraid of us. There are so many people who don't talk to us until after their proposal's rejected, and that's no offense, that's a waste of the talents in this building. There are amazing people who, they want great proposals. Like, they want you to write a better proposal. So I'd say look at the list, guess at the best one you can, and approach that program officer. And I'll tell you what, if you don't get the answer you want from them, write to me, right? I can't promise my response time will be great because I kind of got a lot of things going on because I'm the assistant director, but I will respond to you as soon as I can. I don't think that will happen because our program officers are great. I still have time, right? Awesome. Next time, multiple choice questions. We could get through more of them. What if, this is a really good question. I don't think I know the answer to this. What if I plan on resubmitting or revising a proposal to a program that no longer exists? So I'll take a shot at this. To say a program no longer exists is kind of harsh. Like, what we've done is taken existing, we didn't create anything out of new cloth. We took strengths that we saw that were undervalued, and the repositioning is to make them stronger, right? So that's how I think of it. But what is the answer to this question, program officer? So we're bringing our friend Brian Humes in. So if you don't know, that's okay too. But,
I can take a
I can take a try at it. First of all, there's no real resubmission of a proposal. What you do is you send in a revised proposal, and each proposal is considered anew. Okay. Secondly, I would say, given all the changes that we have, and just following up on what you've said, there should be a clear home for where your proposal might go. And if you have any questions, I would recommend that you get a hold of your program officer, either the program officer where you're thinking it might be appropriate, or the program officer who was the program officer that considered your proposal. And either of those two people can provide you with advice. But following up on what Skip said, I don't see any homes disappearing here. If anything, there are more homes for proposals.
Thank you. I know we might be over, but can I take another couple minutes? Is that okay? Great, thank you. So thank you. We have a great crew back here behind the camera. You can't see them, but thank you guys. Thank you for doing that. What does this mean for my current award? Will management change? No. All the old awards are still being managed under the old programs. Can I still get a no-cost extension?
Yes.
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 Yeah. So this doesn't affect anything going backwards. It's just about going forward. So that's a really good question. Thank you. How do different funding mechanisms overlay eager or rapid? So everything we've talked about is independent of eager or rapid. So what eager or rapids are about are if you have a special circumstance where you can only collect data or do an activity within a short period of time, and you write us a short proposal for a limited amount of money, and we don't typically send it through the normal peer review process because the time when you want to run the study, we just couldn't get peer review done. So eagers and rapids, they still exist. Nothing that I've said changes that. I will say though, I get a lot of questions about these. If you're thinking about sending them in, it's got to be for stuff that can only be done like right now. If you have a really interesting idea and you think it's outside the domains of a program, that's not what eagers or rapids are for. That if you have that idea, talk to me, talk to other program officers, and we'll try and figure out like how, where you fit. Eagers or rapids are for different varieties of we can only do it right now. All right, so that's what that mechanism's for. They still exist, nothing changes. All right, I'm gonna try and give shorter answers so I can get through these. Can you repeat what is happening to science and technology studies? Was that, maybe I didn't have that up there. I think I missed a slide. This change came from the community, right? So when we were talking about the repositioning, we got a couple ideas of people who wanted to change things. I know for some of you who don't like change, that's like, all right, but this happened. And so we have a program called Science, Technology, and Society. Awesome program, great program officer. And the proposal came in like, well, most of us refer to ourselves as science and technology studies. And we were thinking about that and like, okay, well, that's a better way to convey the value to people. And it's what the community talks about. So that came from the outside. What's happening to it is same program officer, same emphases. I think we updated the program description to just kind of bring out things we've learned over the last couple of years. But I wouldn't say, I'm going to say there's a change because I'm going to say it's a better version, but I thought it was great before, so you can decide. But it's not a structural change. That one came from the community. Will there be unexpected or any impacts on partnerships with other countries? Not at all. The way that we do partnerships with other countries is through agreements. They're usually done through programs. Any existing agreements, so anything that was done in the past with a program whose name isn't there anymore, that's still standing. It's still going to continue for the term of that. If they wanted to renew it, it would be with the program that followed. But there's absolutely no impact at all. And this is something that we remain interested in. When I talk about partnerships, other countries are involved too. They have to be, we can only work within the domain of this agency, but there's so much we can learn from others. All right. Will DLI have a dedicated panel and program officer? DLI, so let me answer them separately. DLI will have a dedicated panel because that's really important. We understand that within the linguistics community, there are really different ways of looking at this research, and that it's important for the vitality of DLI work to have a panel who understands the value of it, who's steeped in the value of indigenous languages and multiple languages and languages that people, so that is completely the same. In terms of a program officer, we have an expert this year who's coming in and helping us run it. We do have, we can't sort of multiply positions, right? So what we do every year is look at, where are the proposals coming in and things of that nature, and we try to make sure that we're using the program officers efficiently. So we'll always have a program officer who's knowledgeable about Dell, who understands the community. If you're asking, are we going to have like at least one FTE for that, that's not a promise that we just make to anyone. Like our number of FTEs has been the same for so many years, so it's not like we can grow them. So we try and do the best by all of you by looking at where the proposals are coming in and by making sure that the workloads of the program officers are relatively even. So that's our ambition, and we will, I personally, and we have so much respect for the DLI idea and its legacy that we'll make sure that program runs well, and we'll do it the way that we have with all the other programs. So I don't want to abuse our friends here who are all helping us out, because so thank you so much for sitting through the webinar or standing or whatever you've been doing. We will have other opportunities to talk at other webinars, at the virtual office hours. Again, please feel free to email us. Again, thank you for if you're a social behavioral scientist, please thank you for choosing to do that. It's an incredible service to science and to society. And to those of you who want to participate in NSF, we would love to help you cultivate the best proposals, because that's how we help everybody. Thank you so much, and good night.